Hey guys, Greg here, Bone Tactical, for another episode of the Greg Tambone story. This is episode 4. Today we're going to be talking about the time period revolving around my Utah experience, okay? It's pretty intense, so buckle down, sit down, strap in, and stay tuned. It's going to be quite a ride on this one. For those of you that don't know, Utah is quite the incredible, I would say, the best way that I could describe it, state. In my opinion, it's really like no other state in this once great nation. I think America has gotten a little bit off track from where we started with the original idea of our founding fathers, but I won't get too much into that. I will say that the system of how things work in Utah, specifically with the government, court system, laws, and just really how the state functions as a state, the closest thing I can liken it to would be a third world country, very close to a communist or dictator ruled third world country. It's just absolute dog and pony show. But let's get into my story, and I'll tell you first how I ended up in Utah. In the last episode 3 of this 8-part series, we discussed a little bit about my college football career. Well, I ended up accepting a position as a strength and conditioning coach at the University of Utah in 2014. I will admit I was ignorant to just about anything Utah. Utah, in a positive light, is one of the most beautiful states in the United States, filled with absolutely incredible natural wonders, okay? The woods in the north and the mountains in the north and the deserts and the red rock and the canyons in the south, just absolutely, and the Badlands, just all beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I was blessed to be able to do a great deal of exploring while I was out there. For those of you that haven't been, I definitely recommend it, but be very careful, and we'll get into why. I accepted a job at the University of Utah as a strength and conditioning coach. I immediately became the NCAA Division I strength and conditioning coach to have the worst violent criminal history to ever coach college football. That was not to brag, that was to tell you how incredibly difficult and seemingly impossible, supposedly impossible it was to get to that position. So it was quite a feat. It was not allowed, supposedly. You can't be a convicted felon at all and coach college football, is what they say. So me just getting in that position was pretty incredible. For those of you that know anything about college football, I'm sure you're aware of that. But it also continued to hang over my head like a black shadow, that criminal record. So my college football career ended due to some off-the-field stuff we discussed in the last video, getting into a fight while on Christmas break back home. Ended up a warrant going out for that. It was later dropped because it was obvious self-defense, but still the coaches just didn't want to deal with somebody with a history like mine, a violent history, and then when another encounter came up during my college football career, they didn't kick me off the team, actually. They just decided to not put as much stock in me, I suppose. They didn't want to have to rely on me because they thought that maybe some of my off-the-field stuff might come up and that they would lose a key member of their team, and so they rotated me lower into the depth chart and basically told me that they weren't going to kick me off the team, but as long as I was still in the university, if the university didn't kick me out, they weren't going to kick me out, but they weren't going to rely on me. So at that point, I just decided to graduate as soon as possible. My strength and conditioning coach at the time had moved to the University of Utah, and he put in a good word for me and got me the hookup out there. So then I went right from graduated the University of North Alabama. I had about a 2-month gap, I think, in there where I just toured the country and toured all the national parks. I did a bunch of hiking. I lived out in the wilderness for several weeks out in southern Utah on my way up to to become a strength and conditioning coach. Then I spent some time camping out in Wyoming, just, fields and antelope along the Snake River. Just had a really great, strong connection to self, and had some really great times out there. Then I got to the university and learned so much, being part of a massive Division I football program, going from Division II. Which North Alabama, where I played, is D1 now, but when I played there, it was D2. We had some great athletes, incredible athletes, guys like Janoris Jenkins that I played with, some of the greatest athletes in the world, but the program wasn't necessarily a big program. It was a program geared more towards, problem kids. So it was just a small school with a great football team. Then I went to the University of Utah, and it was a massive school, multi-million-dollar weight room, multi-million-dollar football facility, massive football staff, just everything. It was the opposite, a much bigger program than they had more trouble recruiting, I would say. They didn't have the greatest athletes because they were competing with, schools like Oregon and stuff like that. And, I think a lot of people did know a lot about Utah that I didn't know, and maybe they didn't want to go to University of Utah because of some of the negatives. So really learned a lot and got to the point where I really enjoyed working at the University of Utah, and specifically working with young men and young athletes, being able to mentor them. Several of them had, similar histories to mine, where they were in the streets, so to speak, doing stuff that maybe they shouldn't have been doing, or from rough backgrounds, or had been involved with things they shouldn't have been involved with. And then I could, relate to a lot of those guys. I could help, coach them up, mentor them, things like that. And it was pretty great. The politics of college football really disgust me. It's very dark and dirty, and backstabbing culture, kind of an alpha male, mask wearing, culture, and then stab your fellow man in the back. And that's all, college football. I don't know how much you guys know about college football, but the politics and the coaching staff really turned college football nasty. But the working with the young men part, I loved, and is great. So I can honestly say that it's not for me, but I did enjoy a lot of it. And then the strength and conditioning totally was for me. I really excelled as a strength and conditioning coach. I can honestly say I have a gift of coaching and teaching, and I was a great strength and conditioning coach, and really enjoyed it, and I'm thankful for the opportunity, and I learned a lot there. The way that strength and conditioning coaching works, and coaching in general, is that people kind of shuffle around. So when you want to go up a level, normally what you'll do, instead of just going up a level at one university, unless you stay, like head coaches have their guys that stay with them a lot of times, but it's really hard to get upward mobility and get a better job unless you're just with that guy for a long time and he keeps bumping you up. So when head coaches change, they usually have their guys that go with them, but also they have a lot of spots that need to be filled. So the best way to move up in a program, or move up in football coaching world, is to go from university to university. So when you get a new job at a university like I did, University of Utah, what you do is you apply to a bunch of other universities to higher positions. And as they're changing coaching staffs, you just bump up in position. You go higher and higher up the ranks, unless you get under like a great, like a Nick Saban, and you get in with him, good with him, and then he just brings you everywhere he goes, or, University of Alabama in that case. But, guys like, big time head coaches, they bring their own guys with them, but not everybody, but a lot of the guys. So that's kind of how it goes. So there I go. I'm doing very well, ready to, take on some, and making a big name for myself. So I had started applying to other universities. I had an assistant, number 2 spot. There was 8 strength and conditioning coaches, I believe, at the University of Utah when I was there. There was a bunch. I don't remember. There was 4 full-time guys, and then more. Yeah. So there was a lot of guys rotating in and out. But anyway, I had applied to a couple other schools. I got an offer for assistant to the head strength and conditioning coach. It was like a number 2 strength and conditioning coach in a school with 4 strength and conditioning coaches. Got talking to them and everything, got hired. And just to let you know, when I got my job at the University of Utah, I was one of 300 applicants for the position. I got chosen for that. When I got the next spot, it's a good old boy program, what I'm getting to. When I got the spot hired at this other university, I won't mention the name, and got asked to go out there, I was hand selected. You know, they don't even look at, for this next level, they don't even look at resumes, right? They get thousands of resumes, and no, they don't even look at them. If you don't come with a recommendation, your resume has to be handed to that person, to that coach, by someone they know and trust. Otherwise, they don't even look at your resume. And that's how I got in at the bottom level. Like I said, I went with a coach that I played for in football. When I played college football, he handed my resume to the guy that does the hiring. So that's how it goes. And then once I started making a name for myself, though, a lot of schools wanted me. But this is what happened. So then my record came back to bite me pretty badly. So I was basically already hired at another university, got a huge increase in job, went from the bottom of the rank strength and conditioning coach to upper middle, and about to be, you know, I was literally packing my stuff, going to move out there, and the head coach calls me from this university, you know, probably, I don't know how long before I was about to move out there, but it wasn't too long. And he said, hey, we just found out that you have a felony on your record, and you didn't disclose that. And I said, well, I didn't fill out an application. I just sent you my resume when you asked for my resume. I didn't technically fill out an application. You never asked me if I was a felon. So, you know, why would I just randomly disclose that information to you? If you never asked me, I'm not going to just say, hey, by the way, I'm a felon. But he said, there's no way that you can coach in college football as a felon. And I said, I am a college football coach and I'm a felon. So what's the difference? He said, well, when people find out you're a felon. I was like, what do you mean when people find out? Everybody knows I'm a felon. Like, I'm not hiding anything from anybody. He said, when people find out you're a felon, you're going to be blacklisted in the industry. So I was like, oh, great. So then actually that ended up happening. Basically, he spread the word. This head football coach spread the word to everybody else. Hey, this guy's a felon. Don't hire him. And I was like, wow, so there goes my entire career. Basically, I'm stuck at the University of Utah. So I stayed at the University of Utah for a while, but I will admit that I got bitter and I got pretty depressed. And you guys know that previously to this time in my life, I had been doing a lot of bodyguarding work, bouncing jobs, private security stuff. And while working at the University of Utah for a little while, I quit doing that. It was just so time consuming that I quit doing that. I was working probably 100 hours a week just as a strength and conditioning coach, for money because I wasn't getting paid very little, and then for, you know, action and adventure and a little bit of excitement, I started bouncing again. And then I started working more and more and more, the bouncing jobs, and then that also spiraled out of control. You know, I'm not going to blame it on my, you know, having going through some negative stuff in my life, but I allowed the negative stuff in my life I was going through to affect me negatively to the point where I did some stupid stuff, right? I just started kind of slipping in my life. And I wasn't slipping from a work perspective, because from a work perspective, I was now working about 140 hours a week. I was sleeping in my truck I had the Nissan Titan Overland Expedition vehicle. So that's when I told you I was going all around the country and camping every break I would get, or, you know, Christmas break, spring break. When we had breaks, when the kids were off, I would just go out and stay in the wilderness and stuff like that. And then, because I had an Overland Expedition vehicle that was built for camping and living out of. So I would sleep in my truck a lot of times for an hour a night. Sometimes I didn't even get to go sleep in my truck. I would go sleep in the team rooms, which is meeting rooms, which they're like movie theater rooms that we had at the University of Utah, where linebackers, for example, was where I slept a lot of times where they would watch film. And when they weren't watching film, I'd just go in there and lay down. Nobody would know where I was in there, and just go and lay down and sleep, because you can't sleep in your office when you have a 30-minute break, obviously. So yeah, I was just working crazy hours, and then picked up the bouncing jobs. I started working at Beer Bar, Bar X, Hotel, Dick and Dixie's. I started bouncing at a bunch of different bars and clubs in Salt Lake City, and Salt Lake City has this really crazy dynamic of there's a cult there called the LDS Church, and they just really run the state, control the government, control everything. Very standoffish to outsiders, but I think they're only between like 40 and 60% of the population now, because so many of the young people in this cult are like escaping from the cult, leaving out of it. And the downside is, it's what's really sad to see, is that these people that are leaving it are just going far left wing, like crazy. They're just going crazy liberals. So they're, really supporting all the wrong stuff. Because the Mormon, hierarchy is very right wing. They make themselves out to be very right wing, and what that ends up doing in the long run is, when they have these people that leave their congregation, they just end up going. They want to get away from everything because they realize it's wrong, and they see what's going on, and when they realize that, they go as far off to the other direction as they can, and it's really sad because they do go crazy. So there's a crazy party dynamic in Salt Lake City, and there's a super liberal movement because it's all of these young ex-Mormons that are just rebelling against everything they can. And that being said, if you're into, bar and nightlife, they have a nice bar nightlife scene, some, nice bars and clubs and stuff like that. I wouldn't say nice. They have the party scene is bigger than you would think. And there's some nice restaurants and stuff. It's a beautiful city. Salt Lake City is a beautiful city. They do a very good job at creating like a false sense of reality, I think, because the city itself there's this crazy temple. Just it's really just an organization that you can see is very good at. It's kind of like the Vatican, right? Well, any organization where you have people in control and men, human beings controlling everything, eventually there's going to be corruption involved. And you can see the corruption is rampant here in Utah. And then the city's actually built around this ornate, multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollar temple. Just absolutely crazy. And then the streets are like first seminary, second state. Like the streets are named all off the temple, like marked off the temple. The way it's just pretty crazy. It's wild. But all of this led to me, working a lot of security jobs at nightclubs, and then the whole fact that there's all of these, let's just be honest, there's so many beautiful women, and I don't know what the deal with it is, but there's just a big percentage of really good-looking people, I think, in Salt Lake City, as far as like in compared to other cities, especially. And it's such a beautiful city. Like I said, it's really almost a false sense of reality because the streets are so clean. You very rarely see homeless people in comparison to a city that's that size. In other major cities in America, they just do a very good job of sweeping everything under the rug, so to speak, and just have very strong control. The hierarchy of the government here is also the hierarchy of the Mormon Church, so it's just really easy for them to have off the books backroom meetings that just at their tabernacle or whatever. It's just very interesting dynamic. I suggest you guys look into it. They did an article in Rolling Stone magazine that was kind of interesting. You guys might want to check out about one of the families out there that they had, found out they had massive stores of gold, and they were, using illegal child labor in the name of the church and all this stuff. So it's just really crazy dynamic, really worth looking into and interesting to see. But I could tell a million stories about this. I just don't have enough time right now. But I've met a lot of people. Had one acquaintance, young lady that I was dating briefly. Her father had multiple wives, and I think that might have something to do with the genetics. I don't know, but it's just a pretty crazy dynamic. So there I was, working at the nightclubs, and then we have this dynamic of the super people that were raised very strict conservative and then are rebelling against it. So there's, sex, drugs, rock and roll, just everywhere you look. So I just very quickly spiraled out of control. I got to the point where I was hooking up with, different girl every night, that I was working security. I was working security up to 3 days a week, sleeping, an hour or two, sometimes not sleeping for days, and just really got to a negative point in my life, and then was accused of rape, and that was kind of the low point for me. I would say that was definitely the low point. So I was working security at a nightclub, one of the nightclubs, and I was already at the point where girls would come up and see me. I'd take them up. This is a 5-level club, and only on special events were all 5 levels open. So I would sometimes take them upstairs during my shift. I'd tell one of the security guys, hey, cover for me for a bit. I'm going to go upstairs and have sex with this girl. So I took her upstairs. We had sex. She had come up to see me, took her upstairs. We had sex, went back down. Well, she happened to be with some of her friends. I didn't know she was married. I didn't know she was Mormon, which I guess, most people have some sort of a Mormon connection. But she, in order to remain in good standing in the Mormon church, her friends pressured her to say that she was raped, because if she would have, once they found out that we had sex, because she was married, right? And then you can't, you're not even allowed to have sex if you're not Mormon. There's all this crazy stuff. The kids do all of this weird, they have sex with clothes on, something which is really popular in the Mormon church. They call it floating. I've just like I said, I could tell stories, crazy stories all day long. Comment on this. If you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you're watching this, comment on it. Let me know if you want to hear more crazy Utah stories, because I don't have time to get into a lot of them. But anyway, took this girl upstairs, hooked up with her. We went back downstairs. She left. Her friends were like, hey, what were you guys doing upstairs? Then some of the other bouncer guys were like, hey, she was on the grand tour. She just got, and they eventually, basically, my fellow bouncing friends told her friends that we had just hooked up upstairs. And so for me, this was kind of a normal occurrence, unfortunately. And I will say, guys, this was just really a low point. Very unfulfilling part of my life. Literally having sex at the club with different girls all the time. And then just, I was renting a basement of some other house that was in, Salt Lake City, and it was just doing all, bringing chicks back home, like I said, hardly sleeping, and then going to the school and coaching, and it's like, man, what am I thinking? How could I get that low? I honestly think sometimes, but I really was in a bad spot, and I felt like I kind of was burning out with my life, and that rape accusation was a wake up call for me. So from that rape accusation, basically what happened that night was this girl, her friends pressured her into it so she could try and remain in the Mormon church, I guess is what we found out later on with private investigators, and spending, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on private investigators and all this. Finally figured all this stuff out. But that's what ended up happening. The police came up later that night. I'm still working at the club, right? Normal thing for me. Had sex with the girl, went back to work. She left, went back to work. Police came up that night, talked to me, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I had sex with this girl. What are you talking about? They were like, hey, are you Greg Tambone? I was like, yeah, what's up? What's going on? How can I help you? I had no idea what they were looking for. And then they were like, well, this girl said you had rape. I was like, what? So they did they swabbed me and everything. I was like, I told you I had sex with her. Why are you going to do the DNA thing? I literally just told you that we had sex and all this. And then the detectives investigated and everything. And they even told me, they're like, yeah, it's obvious that you guys had sex. There were witnesses, so yeah, there's no rape involved. Obvious to everyone. I was like, okay, cool. So went about my business. And from there, but that rape accusation just blew me away, and it was my ultimate wake-up call. So I decided to quit coaching at the University of Utah at that point. I think I stayed for another month or two. I put in, I told the coaches that I was going to probably get out of there, and then just decided to get out of Utah. And I went from there and just went full-time with Bone Tactical. At that point, I said, you know what, coaching's not for me, Utah's not for me. I moved back to Alabama. A buddy of mine there had a 4x4 off-road shop, and I just moved what little things I had. And I had been the whole time tinkering with my designs, world's most effective edged weapons and self-defense tools. They were already in production. The The Bone Hawks were already in use with U.S. Special Forces by this time, had been for years by already, and world's strongest, sharpest tomahawks. And I hadn't designed a lot of my non-permissive environment gear. I had actually already invented my own camo, but I wasn't producing I didn't have my clothing line yet. But that's when I really, started a shop, and I had a shop that I was partnering with other people with, and just kept getting screwed over by partnering with other people. I was more doing design, and then I was making the prototypes, and then I was partnering with other guys to help me make the stuff, and it just never worked out. Tried that a few times, so I just opened my own shop in Alabama. Very humble shop. Like, I was literally in the back room of a buddy's 4x4 shop in Alabama, and just working my butt off and trying to make this stuff, and borrowing tools and stuff, but getting it done. And I was working bouncing jobs, and I got back into private security and bodyguarding, and I went overseas to do some private security work. And a buddy of mine called me from Utah and said, hey, the SWAT team just raided the club. A buddy of mine that was a bouncer out there that I used to bounce with. I was overseas. And I think he called, left me a voicemail, whatever, or I don't remember. Finally got in touch with him, and I was like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, man, the SWAT team raided Club Hotel looking for you. Supposedly they said they had a warrant. So I got a lawyer, called a lawyer, said, hey, what do I do? I'm out of the country. Supposedly they're looking for me, all this stuff. And then from that point, I just started trying to fix everything. I don't really even understand how it could have got to that point, because that night and this is 6 months later that the supposed warrant went out, because the night that happened, the detectives were straight up telling me, hey, it's pretty obvious that this is a false rape accusation. And, oh man, everybody knew that it was not the case. So I don't know how it went, and they randomly put a warrant out 6 months later. It was either a mistake or just, I really don't know. I don't understand what could have been. But the resulting damage to this went a lot further than me, because I had been having some pretty decent success with Bone Tactical at this point in Alabama. Things were starting to take off. Like I said, U.S. Special Forces had my tomahawks, and the self-defense tools were really kicking off big time. People were starting to see that world's most effective self-defense tools were now available on a website. So being able to be affordable and available to the general public. And I was using all of my proceeds to take out, I started this program called Warrior Adventures Inc., taking disabled veterans out hunting, fishing, on expeditions. Like you guys know, I had the expedition vehicle, and I was like, well, I want to help people. Who can I help? So a couple buddies of mine that I worked with, one guy was a retired colonel, one guy was a retired master sergeant, and both of them from Army. One was Army OD, the other was a combat engineer. And then, we three of us started Warrior Adventures Inc. And, it was pretty much my baby, but they helped me out with it. And the biggest damage, I think, from me having to shut everything down, I lost my shop in Alabama. I ended up losing everything. We're gonna get into all of this in the next episode, but this was kind of just like the Utah story here. And then the first part of the Utah story, because I was eventually extradited back to Utah years later. In the next episode, we'll discuss my basically life as a fugitive, life as a political prisoner, living in Central America, not being able to come back to the United States, all that kind of stuff. We'll close out this episode with, just saying the biggest loss, I think, in my opinion, was my losing Warrior Adventures Inc. and losing the ability to help so many disabled veterans that we were helping, and people suffering from PTSD, because we were really doing some great stuff. We are doing other great stuff now and big things, but it is kind of I think that was my biggest loss, my biggest regret from all of that, is losing that. And then I will say that I learned a very hard lesson of, the fast life is not ever fulfilling or worthwhile or a good thing. So for you young guys out there, or for you guys that haven't ruined your chances at a good life yet, stay away from the old whiskey and young women. Thanks for watching. Bone out.